I think the best way to introduce our guest who's in studio with us, Brian Richards, is by reading out a text message I received this morning when we let people know that he was coming onto the show. Oh my God, Brian Richards is a marketing god. We're so excited you've got him lined up for the show. Need to get him on as a regular. We are now reaping the rewards today for what he did in the deer industry with masterminding the Savannah brand. Brian, you have been around for a long time. You've seen, not in a respectful wealth of knowledge way, in the space of marketing premium produce as a brand strategist.
Yeah. I've always had a passion for the primary sector, mainly because I come from a country town. My father was a chartered accountant. I trained as an accountant, and I used to help farmers with their shoeboxes full of receipts and all that kind of stuff at the end of the season. And I suddenly realised what a sad circumstance they were in and how they needed to transform their industry. So years later, here we are talking about the primary sector.
Talk us through that then, Savannah. My place is deer fenced. I'm on and off deer farmer, you could say.
Yeah.
Tell us about how long ago you started to get the heads together, because it was a real roller coaster industry for a while then, wasn't it?
It was. I looked at the industry. It really goes back to my interest in appellations and what I call guilds and agreements between people, particularly in the primary sector. The best examples are in France and Italy. And I remember talking to the deer industry in Invercargill years ago and saying, look, you've got a fantastic business. This is this is the meat, the king of all meats and so on, right? And we did an econometric study of the industry and felt that if you could get the schedule up to $6 all year round, then you had a viable business, viable industry. At that time it was $3.60, $3.70, whatever it was, I can't remember now. But this is nearly 27 years ago. I went to see John Falloon. I got him involved with the champagne industry in France, in Épinay, because I'm a graduate in INSEAD, which is a business school there, and I knew these people. And I said, this is a model that you should think about in terms of industry collaboration. And so we brought some of those ideas back to New Zealand. We started the whole process of working with deer farmers in this area, trying to stay separate from the meat industry because they weren't going to treat venison very well at all. We knew that. And so how can we sort of separate ourselves and yet still, shirt-tail some of their activities in terms of killing processes and various things?
For Savannah then, what was the turning point for them to collaborate and come together?
It was really Chernobyl, right? Because we had the idea on the table before Chernobyl, and then when Chernobyl came, we had no brand in Europe, and everybody thought that the deer herds were infected as far north as Scotland, from Russia. And they then came back and said, okay, we do need a brand. Because we were just a generic term called venison, and most European venison eaters think it was shot in the restaurant behind the hills, behind the restaurant just a few hours earlier or whatever. So 60% of most German-speaking venison exports come from New Zealand.
Hiccups you came across within New Zealand, though, getting everyone to come together?
The farmers were for it from the outset. It was led by some foodies who were farmers. That's always been my passion. How can we make more farmers into foodies? They understood fine cuisine. We had the right kind of chefs and people interested in the whole idea. We saw it as a food service, really top-end thing for a start. And we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just simply a name of a piece of meat, that it was the whole kind of accreditation system all the way inside the farm gate. And it was well above the sort of normal standards of farming at that time. The issues of humane, treatment of animals, all that kind of thing, were all part of what Savannah meant. The whole charter was all based on that.
I suppose when you look at it now, you've got the whole meat industry, so to speak, red meat industry, where you put your cattle and sheep in there. Do you think it can be, those two species can be mirrored?
I think that the challenge in the meat industry is they have never really sat down and had what I call a total beef strategy, in the sense that they load the prime cuts, the racks of lambs, the loins and all those kinds of things, and then the Bs and Cs and D grade cuts, etc., are never really differentiated in any clever way. And if they're not foodie type companies and they're still called meat processors, they'll never find that conclusion in their hearts.
They've all come a long way. But do you think there's still a bit of that tribalism amongst our two big cooperatives, Alliance and Silfurna especially?
Yes.
There's a lot of tribalism that dates back decades.
It is, and I think it's a great shame because, the collaborative energies that could be exerted on different products, different types of species and that kind of thing would be much better. And, we don't have enough food technologists in the meat industry. We don't have enough cuisine experts and so on. We do sort of the odd sort of, thing well, but it's not a universal approach to what I call a total beast.
What's, in your opinion, the main things that consumers today, compared to, say, 10 years ago, are expecting in authenticity, transparency, of their food? How are they approaching food differently now?
Well, I think they don't believe the pure green meadow without the whole accreditation process that goes with it.
Yeah.
And they trust the supermarket that's giving it to them in Europe or wherever else, that they have done all those appropriate checks back through the country that they bring the product in from. And so the whole arm's length accreditation of food from anywhere in the world, for that matter, and the provenance story is now very real. And it has to be evidential. It can't be purely emotional. Mm-hmm.
Let's have a look at Icebreaker. From when you worked with them and it was launched to where it is now, your thoughts and opinion.
Well, when Jeremy and I met, he was a young market researcher with an interest and some family connections in Merino with a family in Marlborough. And he came to see me and he said to me, I've got this black singlet idea, blah, blah, blah. And I said to him, well, show me the sort of things in your mind that you wanted to position it. He showed me all these images of blokes climbing up and down the Southern Alps and in their hairy shirts and such like that. And I said, well, they're the hard adventurers. What we want to talk about is the soft adventurers, the people who vicariously want to live this way but never do it. You know what I mean?
Hamish.
Yeah. So we said that. I went back probably 8 or 9 weeks later and said, I think we can get a much better price point, because he was comparing his black singlet with what was available at Wrightson's at $27 and he thought he'd get 42. And I said, no, we can probably get over 100 if we have the right name and the right story, and it's about soft adventure. And so the idea of how to sell less for more is the major change that New Zealand needs to face in the primary sector. That's a good example of it. The business is now approaching 300 million worldwide. It's it's a story that most people know in the adventure world. The challenge now, of course, is that 35 of the competitors all have Merino, because we were the first.
And you can't own a term of a brand, and I think that's the same with Angus. It's,
Yes.
and that's why it's important to rebrand to a new name, like
Yes.
Celia, for instance, with Merino. And there's a lot of hard work New Zealand Merino have done in that space around their ZQ accreditation, but
Yes.
then you can do the same through another exporter and it only be a one-page accreditation. So
Yeah.
it's a minefield, because once we build this brand, New Zealand, very strong across all our primary produce globally, we're at risk of imitation and counterfeit products.
Yes, we are.
Yeah. So
And
how do other regions, areas like Champagne, get around that?
Well, Champagne's a fiercely defended name. If you were to call a piece of shampoo in Masterton Champagne, you have a lawyer up the drive in a week. So they have scouts all over the world watching for any use of their name, and they protect it.
Do you believe it's a cultural difference between the French and Kiwis? Because French also protest if they don't like, the colour of a building, or they've got, a nanny for 3 months each from the government because they protested for it.
Yes, yes,
They're
yes.
vocal.
They are.
And they've got arrogance and confidence.
Yes.
As a culture, we completely lack that. Is it one of our biggest letdowns for actually being able to achieve that premium and stick behind it in our marketing?
It's they talk about the farm gate. I always talk about the fact that it's just a value chain. It's not a supply chain. Everybody adds some value, as long as they are conscious of what value they're adding and at what point and how well they do it. It's very important, underneath some sort of overall umbrella story. Now, if you take the fact, if you compare a French farmer with a New Zealand farmer, the difference with a French farmer is, sure, he's subsidised. There's a famous expression in France that I can't do it in French, but they only bury them 12 inches under because they've always got the hand out. It's a very old-fashioned saying. But the fact about the French farmer is he's got a nose for his wine, he's got a palate for his cheese. Right? He
Sure.
doesn't need to go to, when you go to Mystery Creek, you'll find 200,000 or 300,000 farmers walking around eating junk food. Right? The gap between fine food or good food, well eaten and well grown, etc., is still a big gap for New Zealanders. Now we're getting there, And if you go to a deer farmers conference, they will have beautiful food and that sort of. We've got to turn farmers into foodies, or we've got to turn merino growers into fashion.
But also, too,
people,
on that
etc.,
point,
you know.
to the perception of with the debate that's happening now pre this election, but it has been there for growing for a while, the rural urban divide,
Yep.
the disconnect of that people that live within our cities understanding that we are food producers,
Yes.
and that education within our own country before we get it right, even globally.
That's the responsibility of our supermarkets, the people who actually market food to us as Kiwis, etc. And, you know, New Zealand is the third most obese country in the world, behind Mexico and America. And when you look at nutrition and the issues of good health and so on, the country has all the values to transfer to the cities, as you would see in France, but not here. So the idea behind the fact that we need to be conscious of how we eat and what we eat and become a food nation. We are not a food nation yet. The divide between town and country, sadly, is widening as opposed to coming. And I believe the point to join it is about food and about nutrition.
Because we all need to eat to survive.
And
That's
Countdown and Foodstuffs and all these companies should be doing a lot more in their food halls and introducing farmers. You go to Whole Foods in the States, you'll see stories of farmers on their vegetable racks, and they bring the country to town.
So I went into Countdown in Mount Eden, so when I live up here, to go and get my supermarket shopping for my wee apartment. And I was, you know, so I think about it all the time, and I asked the butcher about the lamb laying there lifelessly with no marketing attached apart from a price and a cut, and he couldn't tell me where it was from. There was nothing around it. Pork and chicken have done a very good job of it, because I know, you know, that it's free range, and I know all the key points because it's packaged. But butchers in our supermarkets still want carcasses, do they not, to present? And then that storytelling has been lost in that chain to the
I think the level
consumer.
of butchery in supermarkets has gone down over the last 25 years, and the high street butcher is almost disappeared in New Zealand. They're now coming back in Britain, right, and some more sophisticated sort of food nations. And because people actually want to know about meat and good cuts and want to be able to differentiate, they want advice as opposed to just literally, you know, looking into a cabinet and taking something. Because, you know, it's quite hard to see tenderness when you're looking at it visually.
Your standalone butchers are making a bit of a comeback, and that's one thing you have to give organisations like Silfern a slight tick on.
Yes.
Their development they've done as foodies. I know you get the recipes of the week through.
Yes.
The way they package their meat is, dare I say it, nearly idiot-proof if you
Yeah.
follow the chef's instructions
That's
on
right.
it. And I suppose that's what, and all the assurities behind that product, and but that's top, that's upper echelon, isn't it?
Why aren't we putting a premium by having scarcity, by seasonality of our food as well? So, you know, lamb's only available within the short window, and it's such a unique, you can only get it like asparagus or oysters.
Yes.
Would that help in terms of the premiums we can get by making...
In the older countries where they didn't have refrigeration and their traditions were built on basically seasonal eating, and they were artisans producing stuff and bringing it to the village square, that is the best pattern of eating, and that's where the best premiums are usually retained. Your point is very true, that the longer you extend the season, the lower the price point. And it's the same with kiwi fruit. Internationally, we know that, you know, the shoulder price drops as the Italians are coming in, or the Germans are coming, or the Chileans are coming in, etc. Although they're literally the same season as ours. But just that idea of having this premium product at a premium time of the year, and not trying to grow for volume. And we've been crossbreeding animals and trying to extend the season and all this sort of
You
stuff.
get more
you know.
lambs out of them.
But all we're doing is selling more for less. That's what we're actually doing. And your point is that how do we sell less for more? Is that you make it a premium and so on, and you position it at a certain time of the year. I think that's important.
Spring lamb at 12, 14, 15 weeks old, called that spring
Beautiful.
lamb. But
Yeah.
then you go into the next category, and I know lambs being 12 months of age now is still considered lamb.
Yeah.
It's not the same product, is it?
No.
Now, you mentioned earlier about venison and Savannah. Do you think that was a point of difference? As you said, a lot of the patrons in these restaurants thought it was shot on the hills directly behind their restaurant. And that was very seasonal, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. The problem with that is that the hygiene factor now globally is more serious and more watched over and looked at. So New Zealand's farm-raised venison, we We tried to use the word ranch in German because a farm in Europe could be 3 acres, you know. So we wanted to have this, this expansive kind of image of deer farming, which we still have. And yet we wanted to provide all the hygiene factors that major retailers or major restaurants need to do, because they have to, obviously, hand on heart, they have to say their sources. Sometimes if you do have wild game coming in, you've got to know the source and who shot it and all the rest of it, right? So it's much more serious these days.
You're a strong believer, and many out there on your side, including myself, is farmers, as we call ourselves, whether you're horticulture, viticulture, sheep, beef, dairy, anything, should be known as foodies. We're food producers, aren't we?
We are. And New Zealand has always been a food nation. It's interesting that I've just been reading some stats recently in dairy, and all of a sudden butter's coming back again. Margarine's less popular. And, one of the things we never did when we developed a spreadable butter was we never got a margin for it. The New Zealand Dairy Board that developed it prior to Fonterra never got a margin when they developed that. It's an amazing piece of IP into innovation. So the innovation that we can bring to food and the price points we can develop, if we're clever, are still ahead of us in many different areas.
Connecting our tourism to our food. And I myself want to go to Europe because I'm a foodie and love wine. And I know all the key places I would go because of the connection to food tourism. And we're doing that. We're not doing that well at all. And I see that in Central Otago and around Queenstown, the catchment for them. And the importance of that when we're connecting back to the provenance story, and how can we have that collaboration between the tourism and the primary industry?
I think it's about local regions actually working together, like the Central Otago District Council working with the local farmers, the artisan food producers in the area, and the tourism operators, and seeing where they can join the dots, either in a restaurant tour or a recipe book that's for the region, etc. But it's basically Tuscany in reverse, or Provence in reverse, etc., isn't it? That we are now have come of age as a nation. New Zealand is starting to bob up all over the world now in terms of recognition as a country, and our food is not known to anybody yet, really, other than lamb. And so it's that sort of saying, when people come out here from Europe and they're agreeably surprised with the quality of the food they are, and the styles and the cooking techniques are all here. They're all global now, but we're not known for it yet.
Absolutely. That was the comment came also from sitting next to an American, rich American flying out of Queenstown that I sat next to, and asked him about his time here, and he was just going, "Your food is insane." And I said, "Yeah, yours is not very good." When I went over there,
That's right.
And they don't realize. So it's an exciting. You'd say that the future is bright, and we should put sunglasses on.
I think so, but we need to work more collaboratively. We need to, these companies that are very territorial, the recognition of innovation in food, all those sorts of things, the behaviours of our companies, and also the governance systems of our bodies that administrate farming. Federated Farmers, many of these bodies were developed with voting systems and electoral processes and the appointment of their management systems, which were done at a time 100 years ago. And some of these bodies are no longer needed, in terms of what they do. We need a subcommittee on food at Federated Farmers. You probably haven't got one. I don't know, but etc.
Yeah, Minister of Food Innovation and Marketing.
Well, MPI is a good idea. The whole idea of a value chain MPI is a good idea, but that was a ministry bolted together only 5 years ago, and we still don't know what they do. Every news item, every piece of literature they put out is all kind of adversarial because they're managing some difficult crisis or whatever. But the thought of MPI, what it represents, is a terrific idea. And in terms of the reincarnation of the old MAF, etc. But they really haven't told the master story of who they are yet.
Do you think 750 million from PGP funding will be tenfold in terms of premium in your lifetime?
As long as it pulls collaborative, like interests together, and they don't fight.
And they talk to each other.
And they actually get into a product or a service as fast as possible, and not the rhetoric behind it all.
That don't fight and talk to each other. I think that might be the clincher.
Yeah, good way to end. Brian, if you would kindly come back on our show on a regular basis, we would love to have you. You're a great thought leader in the space of premium marketing of our produce, and I know that this interview will be well listened to and well liked across both rural and urban listeners. So thank you very much for taking your time to come in.
That's a pleasure. Be delighted to return.
Radio Live Rural Exchange.